Hey there guys, welcome to my channel. I'd like to talk to you today about VLANs on Juniper devices, specifically on Juniper switches. As you can see here, I've got a topology, two Juniper QFX switches, and that's what we're going to use for today's demonstration. So you can see here that the switches are connected together on interface XE003. And since this is, like an emulated environment or virtual environment, whatever you want to call it, this connection is done, within the topology, and that will show you here that it's up the interface when you do a show interface. But if you would have a physical Juniper switch, for example, then even if you connect a cable between two devices and you do show interface, it will tell you that the interface is not found because it doesn't exist unless there is configuration under the interface. For example, if we do a show interface here, you can see it's empty. So in this case, it would tell you interface not found when you try to look at it. So that means that you will have to normally configure something. Now by default, the interfaces, sometimes they have DHCP enabled on them, sometimes they have some, L2 config, like switch port, in Cisco speak, right? So in order to configure something on a Juniper device, you need to enter config mode, and then in order to type the actual commands, you need to preface them with the set. So whatever you want to do on a Junos device, you need to start by typing set, because you're kind of setting options or configurations, commands, whatever. So if we would like to create a VLAN, since that's what we're going to talk about today, we need to set something within the VLANs section of the configuration, and that something is a VLAN. So we're going to give the VLAN a name, VLAN 100. We'll give it a VLAN ID of 100. Now, what this has done is that it has typed something inside the configuration. I'll just show you here what happens when you do a show after entering the configuration mode. You'll see the whole config here. It's quite long. And at the end here, you have the VLAN section. Previously it wasn't there because it was empty. Now a better way to look at the VLANs after you added something is to just type show VLANs, right? It'll just show you that part of the config. So it's much easier to navigate. It's similar to the show run pipe section command that you have in iOS. So from here, what we can do is we can type the VLAN, we can add the VLAN in a different variety of ways, right? So previously I just used a one-liner here, right? Set VLANs, VLAN name, and the ID. What we can also do is we can actually edit the VLANs section, which means that we will kind of move into that section. So at this point we've placed our cursor, or we've entered the VLANs section of the configuration. You see that the top here changed from edit to edit VLANs. So we are not anymore at the top of the configuration, we are now inside the VLANs section. So if we do show here, we will see the VLAN and nothing else, right? So we won't see the rest of the configuration because we are only inside the VLANs section. So if you have a lot of config that you need to do, it's much safer to go into the section that you want to work with, so that you don't accidentally change other sections or make any mistakes. So from here, for example, let's say we want to add VLAN 200, then we could just either we'll do set VLAN 200 VLAN ID 200, or we can do edit VLAN 300, for example, and that will place us inside the configuration for VLAN 300. So when we do show here, it's empty because we haven't added anything, but if we add a VLAN ID of 300 and we do show. Now it's there, but you see, so we are inside the VLAN here. Now if we type up, then we will move up one step and we're back inside the VLANs section. And then if we type up one more time, we're at the top of the configuration again. And obviously we wanted to look at the configuration for interface XE003, right? And that's empty because we're going to use this interface to communicate with the other switch. So we can get into the habit of always doing edit, so that we will move into the section that we want to work with, instead of doing one-liners from the top of the configuration, because that's not really effective. And it can also be risky, especially if you're learning something new. So now we're inside the interface. As we can see, it's empty. So from here, we need to create a unit. The only unit you can create by default on interfaces is unit 0, and that needs to always be present. Otherwise, your configuration will not, work. You'll get errors as well later on. So what we want to do is we want to add the newly created VLAN, one of them. Let's pick VLAN 100. We'd like to add that to this interface and make it into an access interface, or access port, whatever you want to call it. So we need to enable something called family Ethernet switching. Ethernet switching is like switch port on a Cisco device. And once you create or add that family to a unit, you won't be able to do any L3 configuration on the unit. So for example, you won't be able to do, you won't be able to assign an IP address. Basically, in most cases, when you add a family to a unit, that will become the type of unit. The unit will become that type. So you are not able to mix different families on an interface. Alright, so now if we want to add the VLAN to the interface and make it into an access port, we would have to type set unit 0 family Ethernet switching VLAN members. And from here we need to type the name of the VLAN. For example, VLAN 100. Now you see I'm not able to type it. You can see here, right? It doesn't really turn up. In Junos, in most cases, it's possible for you to tab and autocomplete most parts of the config. Now, you already know that I added the VLANs earlier, right? And now we've added some more configuration. But unlike with iOS, nothing is active on the switch until we commit the configuration. So in order to commit something, we should first check what we are going to commit to make sure it's correct, and you do that by typing show pipe compare. That'll show you that under interface XE003 we're going to add a unit and a family to that unit. Then we are also going to, under the VLAN section, add 3 VLANs. Now, is this correct? Does it look okay? If you think this is fine, then we'll do a commit check. What this will do is it'll check that the commands are correct Junos commands. It's not like it will troubleshoot anything, so if you do something that breaks something, it will still break, but it's just checking that the commands are entered correctly and that there are no dependencies missing. And obviously the check succeeded, so this means that we can go ahead and commit, and we should have the expected result, if you will. So now if we do show VLANs, for example, you'll see the VLANs there. Now we can go back under the interface and we can add the VLAN. You see now, if I do, for example, V and I tab, you'll see it auto-completes. And then if you tab again, it'll show you that, okay, you have these 3 different VLANs that you've created, starting with VLAN. So now we can type a 1 and tab and enter. And if we do a show from here, we can see that it's been entered here. This means that it's an access port now. A VLAN has been added to the interface. Now, unlike Cisco, for example, you don't have to define it an access port. It becomes an access port by default as soon as you add a VLAN to the port. You can still go and define it as an access port if you want, and you do it like this. You do it by typing interface mode under the Ethernet switching family. You see you have trunk and access here. You don't have to do it, so I suggest you get used to not having to do it, because it's an extra command or extra line in the config that's redundant. There's no need to add it. So just get used to the fact that when you create access ports, add one VLAN to them, and that's it. They become access ports. Now I'll show you a common gotcha here. So if you add another VLAN, let's do VLAN 200, and then we can go back to the top of the configuration. We can do a show compare again to look what we're doing, and we're going to add this. So, and now let's do a commit check, and you'll see it gives an error where it says access interfaces can be part of only one VLAN, and then it tells you that the configuration check failed, and it shows you really which part of the configuration it's complaining about, so it's very easy to see it immediately. And obviously the reason is that we tried to add two VLANs onto a access port or access interface, whatever you want to call it. Now, in order to fix that, we would have to create a trunk. So we would have to add interface mode trunk under Ethernet switching, and this will now enable the commit to go through, or the check. We haven't committed anything, and remember, if we don't commit the configuration, nothing will happen. It won't become active yet. Alright, so let's see. We created the trunk here with two VLANs. Let's commit that. And then, now this is just a simple L2 configuration. We can go ahead and do the same here. Obviously, we can use the up arrow here. You can quickly recreate it. It doesn't really take that long. So it's fairly simple stuff if you know how to type, obviously. Otherwise it might get tricky. Okay, we'll do the same interface mode. You see here I'm doing everything as a one-liner here, right? So the cool thing is that you can do it in a couple different ways once you get comfortable with how Junos works. But like I said, I always recommend that you go into the section that you're going to edit. Now you can see I can't tab. Remember why that was? Because we haven't committed the VLANs yet, but I can still type it. I can still type the configuration. So now we can go top here, and then we'll do show compare. We can see here that what's going to be added. Okay, under the XE003 interface we're gonna add the unit family, trunk, 2 VLANs, and then under VLANs we're gonna add 3 VLANs. Okay, great, that sounds good. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna create a layer 3 VLAN. In order to do that, we will have to introduce something called an IRB. Now on older versions of Junos, you would use something called interface VLAN, which is very similar to the Cisco equivalent. but eventually that was standardized to make things look similar to what they are on Juniper firewalls and routers. So they started using IRBs instead. So in order to create a layer 3 VLAN or a VLAN interface, if you're more familiar with Cisco stuff, we can then do it like this. We'll do a edit interface IRB, and then we have to again do a unit. Let's use unit 100 to stay consistent. The unit can be whatever. Under IRBs anyway, the unit can be whatever. It doesn't have to be the same as the VLAN ID, but of course that makes things much easier. Now, since we're going to put an IP address here, /30 IP, then we need to create the correct family. And you can see here, now we've already added the iNet family. Previously on the interfaces we had the Ethernet switching, right, because we wanted L2 there. But we're going to create the layer 3 interface now. So in this case, we're going to do set family iNet address 10.10.10.1/30. So what this does is it adds an IP address under the iNet family. So the iNet family makes the unit, so unit 100, into a layer 3 interface, and that enables you to add an IP address. And once we've done this, we need to then say that VLAN 100 will use this unit as its L3 interface. So let's go back to the top of the configuration. Let's go and edit within the VLAN section. Let's go into VLAN 100. Here it is, the ID of 100 that we added earlier. Now we need to say that, okay, I want you to use the IP address that we defined earlier. So we need to create an L3 interface link, if you will. So this is a connection between the VLAN and the layer 3 interface that we created. So IRB.100. So it's IRB unit 100. So instead of typing unit, we'll do the dot here. And once we create this, then that means that, okay, now there is a layer 3 VLAN interface. So let's do a show compare again to make sure that everything looks okay, which it does. We'll do a commit check as well, and then we'll commit it because it all looks good. Now we're gonna go into lab 02 here. We'll do the same. So now we will do configure interface. Where are we? We are here. So set interface IRB unit 100 family iNet address 10.10.10.2/30, and then we will also go into the VLAN. Now we'll do it as a one-liner so you can see the difference. Set VLANs VLAN 100 L3 interface IRB dot 100. Show compare, everything looks okay. Commit check, the commands are correct, yes. So now we can commit. Let's go out of config mode and let's ping the other side. Yeah, that looks good. Alright, excellent. Let's see if we can ping lab 2 from here. Yeah, look at that. Pretty simple, guys, isn't it? I hope this gave you a good intro to VLAN configuration on Junos. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, or if you want to see anything else, you know, not just Juniper related, but you know, any networking stuff. I have physical, you know, Juniper firewalls and switches and stuff here as well, so I can show, you know, whatever demos or examples that you want. Just let me know, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. See you next time.